Hello everyone, my name is Daniel Backer and welcome to Off the Wall Novels. Today I've got a book haul. I'm also going to talk a little bit about Carl Jung and his influence on my novel called Lionel Lancet and the Right Vibe. Beyond that, I've been living in New York for about 3 months now, which feels really crazy, and it's actually really hard. And I knew it would be. It was really hard when I first moved to Los Angeles, and it's really hard now. I think the first 6 months are said to be the hardest and can confirm. I've been substitute teaching, which has a lot of really inspiring moments and fulfilling moments, but it's also just extremely draining, and I don't think it's compatible with my creative pursuits. So I'm going to be looking for a new job here before too long. And I also just don't know a lot of people out here, and so it's been very lonely, and that is kind of getting to me. But I think that that's also the experience that I signed up for. I wanted to have just a bit of like a pressure cooker experience where I enter a new city where I don't really have like a predetermined way of being in order to inspire myself and rediscover my interest in art and writing and that sort of thing. So I actually have finished the first draft of a novella that I'm going to be releasing probably next year. It's going to be a little bit slimmer than Lionel Lancet and the Right Vibe, and it has to do with monarchy and synthesizers. So that's all I'm going to say for it right now. But I'm actually going to try to release a soundtrack with it, so it's going to be another multimedia project. My first book I released, Abraham, was also a multimedia project, but I think it was a little too ambitious. I was 23 at the time, and I was just trying to do too much with it, and so I've learned a ton about creativity since then, and I plan to put that into this next release in about a year, or maybe a little more, maybe a little bit less. I'll have to see. But I think moving to New York definitely helped with the inspiration for that, because just being in a completely different environment where no street I walk down is familiar, I have no paths laid down, no habits yet here, which is really cool. So I am eager to become more social and get to know more people, and I'm also going to try to get back into acting, which is something that I've really missed, but it kind of fell by the wayside after college because there were just only so many hours in the day. And after I stopped smoking weed, I just haven't really been as into music, so that I think is going to currently get put on the back burner, even though I am planning to do a soundtrack with the release of the next book. And also, I'm announcing that I am going to be releasing some music later this year. All of this was recorded over the summer, but I just haven't had time to promote it in the way that I want to. But this is my first release that's going to have synthesizers on it, as well as guitars and vocals, so I'm really excited to show it to everybody, and I might show a little clip of it, or maybe use a clip of it in the soundtrack of this. I'll have to see when I edit this. But let's get to some book haul. First thing is, we have 2 books by E.M. Forster. I know nothing about E.M. Forster or A Room with a View or Howard's End, and so I'll be going in pretty blind with this, but since I've been reading Edith Wharton, a lot of people have recommended I check out E.M. Forster, so I ended up buying it. I don't know if I even am excited for it, but people just told me to get into it, and so I thought I'd check it out. There's a fruit fly in front of my face. That's how I try to get most of my book recommendations, is to connect it to something that I've already been reading. Because usually when I try to just completely branch out and read something that has nothing to do with anything that I like, then I end up not liking it. And so I am thankful for the recommendation, although I wouldn't say this is on like the top of my list or anything. It'll probably be a while before I check out either of these. But the one I am extremely excited to read is Synchronicity by Carl Jung. This one has been on my list for a long time, and I finally broke down and bought it, and I really like this edition of it. And I have a lot of synchronicities in my life, and it's not necessarily something that I read into a lot, even though I think it's fascinating when they happen, because it's usually not very spread out. I'll just have a week where I have like a bunch of synchronicities every day, and then I just don't really have them anymore. And as far as I know, this book describes it as an acausal connecting principle. And so I think that by that he means that it's not about cause and effect, Like, for example, if you're thinking about your cousin and then your cousin calls you, it's not the fact that you think about it that makes your cousin call you, but it's more that there's a connecting principle happening, that maybe on some level in the universe, things happen simultaneously because they are connected in some way. I think that's what he means by it. That's the notion that I'm under before reading this, but maybe that will change after I read it. Carl Jung is super cool. And like I said, he's somebody that inspired a lot of my writing, and Lionel Lancet and the Right Vibe, specifically this book called The Undiscovered Self. So I guess this is from the same publishing company or same type of edition as that last one. And The Undiscovered Self, I just read at a really uncertain time in my life when I moved back to Kansas City from Los Angeles for the first time, had a huge existential crisis and was looking to consult some great minds in order to see how to live and how to be. And it's a big critique of scientific rationalism, and not necessarily saying how it's false, but it just shows how scientific rationalism can be bad for the soul and bad for the spirit and bad for understanding yourself. Because if you just understand yourself in terms of your demographics and how you measure up to other people externally, then you're going to realize you don't measure up in some way. There's always going to be somebody bigger, better, badder than you. And also, it makes people think of themselves as one in a mass. It makes us think in these like large quantities, and your individualism gets diminished within that. And so the undiscovered self is about looking within. And he talks a lot about like the difference between a creed and a spirituality, where like a creed is more of a set of rules and a doctrine you follow, whereas a spirituality, I don't think he uses that word, but he contrasts this away from a creed, saying that like it's really more about understanding your fundamental worth coming from within. And I used a lot of that and tried to like specifically depict some of these ideas in my book, Lionel Lancet and the Right Vibe, where the main character is very short, he's overweight, and he's an atheist. And so the only ways that he knows how to understand himself are through these like scientific dimensions and his demographics, and that always just makes him feel lesser than. But then his interior frequently flares up and gives him these dissociative lapses that he doesn't really know how to understand. And that was my attempt to show like his undiscovered self trying to push outside of the bounds of his body and be like, hey, Lionel, notice me. So I got a ton of inspiration out of The Undiscovered Self, and I'm sure I'll get a lot out of the Synchronicity book too. But in a complete contrast to my discussion of scientific rationalism and the critique of it, we have some science. So I don't read a lot of nonfiction, and I definitely don't read a lot of science nonfiction. And so I have decided to change that by reading Behave by Robert Sapolsky. Robert Sapolsky first caught my eye on a TED Talk a long time ago, where he was talking about the difference between humans and animals. Humans are animals, obviously, but sometimes things that we think make us different than animals, we actually find manifesting in other species. And so he did a really cool talk just about how like certain human behaviors actually are unique, and then other ones are like, nope, dolphins do that, crows do that, etc. And so more than anything, I'm still not very far into this. I really like the way that he frames his scientific discussion in this book, because he really is careful to say that this is not the whole story. He's a neurobiologist and a primatologist, and so he talks about the hormones, the brain chemistry, evolution, and those scientific factors that contribute to human behaviors, but he's also talking about them in terms of these time frames, like what's going on in the neurochemistry 1 second before an action or a behavior happens, what's going on that week, what's going on in like the hereditary line, like a generation back, what's going on in evolution millions of years back. And so I think that by really limiting his scope, it speaks to a kind of like intellectual humility and honesty that I find really resonant, because he's not trying to say it's the full picture. I wouldn't expect that many scientists are saying that their perspective is the full picture, but this can be like a characterization of science sometimes, that they're talking about a sense of totality and like this is the end of the story. And since he does talk about it through a scientific frame, I think he gets at some of the philosophical ideas that I'm really into without expressing them in those terms. And so he talks about all of these different kinds of scientists and like what they would say about a specific behavior. And I thought that was really cool because it shows that the idea of knowledge or intellect is kind of a patchwork system, and it has a whole lot to do with like what side of the story you're looking at. And we're never going to really know everything. You just have to kind of draw your boundaries and your borders around what you're trying to understand, and those are going to shape the things that you understand. And if you watch any of the videos on my channel, you know that's like right up my alley. I love that kind of stuff. So that's all that I'm going to do for today. Just wanted to give you all a quick update. Pringle didn't want to come out. He kind of growled at me when I tried to get him out of his cage. And I don't mean to be crass, but Pringle is currently rubbing his groin on his little swing right now. He's a little hormonal, and so that's those clicking sounds that you hear in the background. Seems like he's having a good time. We're sex positive in this house, and so I leave him to it. But this has been Off the Wall Novels. If you want to support the channel in any way, you can donate to my Ko-fi account. And I'm actually going to extend the offer. If you donate to my Ko-fi account, then I will invite you on the show to do a conversation over coffee. So it's literally a coffee that you'll be buying me, and to show my thanks, we can chat about books or any ideas or questions that you might have for me. So signing off, I'm Daniel Backer, and there's Pringle enjoying himself in the background. Goodbye.